It's recap time. Welcome to the One More Recap. Today I'll be explaining an action thriller movie called Driver, released in the year 2011. The film starts with our protagonist, aka the driver, a melancholic loner with a special talent for driving cars and stunts. In the very first action sequence, we find him participating in a bank robbery and assisting as a getaway driver. The protagonist has a very deep-rooted system of pulling these robberies off and sets a timer for 5 minutes. The first robber gets inside the car, and the timer keeps ticking. In this hyper-tensed opening sequence, we are left to guess whether the second robber will arrive in time or not. Meanwhile, the driver remains calm and composed while the timer inches close. Eventually, the second robber arrives just in the nick of time, and the driver starts his car. Just when you think everything is on track, the police car siren starts to get on their tail. This is when we get to see the driving expertise of the protagonist, who swiftly loses the heat. Not only he is able to get through the cars, but he is also able to shrug off a helicopter, looking for them. The tense moment in the car chase arrives when the driver finally parks the car inside a basement and leaves the place unnoticed. After his nighttime robbery, we get to see a slightly different version of the driver. In the morning, the driver confides in with his neighbor Irene. The two exchange a brief look in the hallway and move on to their respective lives. Later that day, we get a glimpse of the driver's day job, a stuntman in movies who crashes a car in character, while his happy-go-lucky boss, Shannon, supervises. The driver pulls off the stunt very well and concludes his daytime job. The next scene lands him in a shopping mall, where he meets with the cute Irene again. However, this time he tries to avoid Irene and her son, Benicio. As fate would have it, Irene's car breaks down. The driver intervenes to solve the problem. For the first time, the driver is introduced to Irene and gets inside her room for a glass of water. Before leaving, the driver also reveals his profession, aka daytime profession, which is a car mechanic. The scene shifts to a negotiation between sly-looking Shannon and the old mobster Bernie, where he pitches for a racing car team led by the driver. As expected, the mobster is impressed by the driving skills and agrees to a crooked deal. The scene shifts to another wholesome sequence when Irene and her son meet the driver again. Only this time at Shannon's garage, where he is busy working. When Shannon notices that the driver finally has some acquaintance, he asks him to drop Irene and her son home. The driver then has a moment of peace, together with the family. They go to several picnic-like locations and spend the entire day together. After this little get-together goes as well as planned, the film shifts to the darker aspects of the driver's life. At first, he receives a one-on-one threat from irritating Bernie. The guy informs him about the counteractions of his unfulfillment, and how his boss, Shannon, received a similar treatment years ago. Meanwhile, while the driver and Irene are out on another night, she states that her husband, Gabriel, will be out of jail very soon. This doesn't draw much of a reaction from the driver, but the dynamics change when Gabriel returns home. Irene throws a party and is reluctant about the future course of things. The driver gets invited but prefers talking to Irene in the hallway. This is when a buzz-cut-looking Gabriel thanks him for taking care of his family while he was away. Things become awkward between the driver and Irene. The twist in the story happens when the driver runs into a past friend, which unfolds some dark secrets of his past. The driver notices a beaten-up Gabriel along with his son Benicio. This is when he confronts him, and he reveals that he has gotten out of jail with some terms and conditions. The driver also runs into Irene and notices that she has no clue about the situation. She believes that it's a usual trouble that Gabriel keeps landing himself into. Next up, he assures Irene that he will take care of everything and it will be all right. He reveals that he owes it to a mobster, who is now threatening to take away Irene and his son. The driver gets together with Gabriel and meets the mobster. He cracks a deal with him and states his rules for pulling off a robbery. The shady-looking mobster agrees to it as if he had planned something else. The day of the robbery arrives, and the driver accompanies Gabriel, along with a clever assist, Blanche. The robbery goes as planned until a second car arrives and starts shooting at Gabriel. This leaves Gabriel dead as the driver rushes away from the shooting. A car soon starts to follow them, and the driver learns they all have been sabotaged. This leads him to use his car skills and lose the heat. Eventually, he is successful in doing so and gets the bad guys off his tail. The driver takes Blanche to a hotel room and inquires about the chronology of events, as to understand what went wrong and how they were set up. Meanwhile, the cops arrive at Irene's home to inform and inquire about the ordeal. This is when the driver calls on the phone and has a conversation with Benicio. He gets to know about the situation and decides to proceed cautiously. The driver then interrogates Blanche about the course of events. Blanche spills the beans that it was pre-planned that they would be double-crossed. However, the death of Gabriel was not one of them. It is revealed that the mobster played crooked and pinned the blame on Gabriel and wanted the cash. This is when one of the henchmen arrives and eliminates Blanche. An alert driver snatches the gun from the henchman and eliminates him instead. He then uses his sharp skills to take out the second bad guy and leave the place. The driver gets to Shannon and patches his wounds. He then straightaway pays a visit to the crooked mobster and uses his hardcore interrogation technique to get the truth out of him. It is revealed that the entire setup can be linked back to Nino, the henchman for Bernie. The driver makes a direct call to Nino and informs him that he has the cash and will be with him for exchange. However, the driver has a completely different plan in mind. The driver then pays a visit to Irene and informs her about the robbery gone wrong. He also states that she can keep the cash. Irene gets infuriated with the driver and slaps him, but later starts to look at him differently when he reveals a plan for a new life with Benicio. Right at this juncture, the lift arrives. A shady-looking man tells them that he must be on the wrong floor. When the three of them get together in the lift, the driver notices that the shady-looking man is Nino's henchman. When the driver realizes that this might be his last moment with Irene, he goes for a kiss. Right after, he dismantles the bad guy and eliminates him strongly right in front of Irene. This leaves Irene in a state of discomfort, who remains in utter shock. The face of the driver reveals that he will go to any extent to protect Irene and her son. The driver then confronts Shannon in the parking and learns that he was the one who gave away their location. He expresses his anger with him, but then advises him to run away before Nino and Bernie get to him. Later on, Bernie gets angry at Nino for going after one of their own. He informs him that if the information leaks out, they both are done. This is why they decided to eliminate everyone who knew about the robbery. Meanwhile, the driver visits a film set and takes a mask with him. On the other hand, when Shannon is running away, grumpy Bernie pays him a visit. He has a final conversation with Shannon before eliminating him. The driver arrives after a while and notices what happened to Shannon. This leaves him even more filled with revenge. He gets into his mask and decides to return it to Nina. While driving behind his car, he crashes it into him and then throws it off a cliff. An injured Nino tries to run for it, but the driver overpowers him and eliminates him among the seashores. Right after, the driver calls up Bernie and states that Nino's gone. This is when Bernie proposes a peace treaty and calls him up for an exchange. The driver agrees to the resolution. Before this, the driver rings up Irene and reveals his true feelings. He tells her how much she and her son have meant to him. The driver then meets up with Bernie at a restaurant. This is when Bernie informs him that he will spare Irene and the kid, but he is gone. The driver agrees to this deal and decides to give him the cash. When the two get outside to settle the score, a sly Bernie stabs the driver. At this moment, it seems that all hope is lost and the driver is gone. But to everyone's surprise, the driver gets up and retaliates with the same blow that eliminates Bernie. Eventually, he leaves the scene with his car and slowly drives away. The camera pans towards an eliminated Bernie, alongside the bag of cash, as the driver leaves in the sunset, away from the danger. As the driver is inside his car, he contemplates about his life that could have been, along with Irene. Meanwhile, Irene knocks at the driver's door, only to find him gone. One can interpret that the driver decides to stay away from Irene at last, so that trouble doesn't find her again. The film ends here. I hope you liked this movie recap. Please comment on what you liked about this movie and what scene you liked, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.